Cheese ray! Cheese ray! Cheese ray!
Cheese ray! Cheese ray!
Did you know that in the Despicable Me movies, there are numerous references to characters from other Illumination films? And it seems that the character chosen from the franchise to make these references is always the same: Margot. For example, in the first Despicable Me movie, Gru's eldest daughter was wearing a t-shirt featuring none other than the Lorax. Yes, the protagonist of the famous dance meme movie. It turns out that the Dr. Seuss character would, shortly after, have his next film made by Illumination. But wait, that wasn't the only time Margot advertised an Illumination character. Because in Despicable Me 3, it was the Grinch's turn to adorn the girl's shirt, who is also another famous Dr. Seuss character and would be the protagonist of the next Illumination film. Those were the first 2 out of the 25 curiosities, details, and Easter eggs that we found in the 3 Despicable Me movies, and also in the 2 Minions movies. Stick with us here to learn about each one. Remember Dr. Nefario, Gru's right-hand man? Everyone knows he appeared in all the Saga's movies, but most fans have no idea that he also appears in the Minions movie. He is the young man exhibiting a freezing ray gun while young Gru and his mother watch him at the villain's convention. I think he left a good impression and inspired young Gru to become a great villain in the future. Still talking about him, in the 3rd movie, we see that the same Dr. Nefario accidentally freezes himself in carbonite. This is a clear reference to the famous Star Wars character Han Solo, when in The Empire Strikes Back, he is also frozen in the same way. Gru uses the expression, "Minions assemble!" in Minions 2, in an obvious reference to the Avengers and Captain America. This happens when the Minions are about to fight against the Vicious Six. Considering that Marvel is owned by Disney, this was a direct reference to the content of its biggest competitor. They have a lot of courage, we can't deny.
Minions assemble!
So here I go, Avengers! Assemble.
And speaking of Vicious Six, for those who enjoy comics and superhero stories, you should know that in Spider-Man stories, the hero faces a group of supervillains also called the Vicious Six. It's confirmed Illumination's gang is a big fan of Marvel. Back to the first movie, when Gru goes back to the Bank of Evil seeking financing for his plans, you can see below the bank's name written in small letters, former Lehman Brothers. This is a joke, as Lehman Brothers was one of the largest American banks that went bankrupt during the global crisis of 2008. Can we really trust this bank, Gru? In this movie, we can also see in the girls' bedroom some very interesting items, like some paintings and very famous artworks such as, believe it or not, the most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa. Whoever thought Gru was just any villain got it very wrong, huh? If you think Gru is the best villain of all, subscribe to the channel here to not miss our next videos. Another curiosity is that although there are hundreds of minions, 3 of them always stand out: Kevin, Stuart, and Bob. You already knew that. Now, have you noticed that Gru's daughters, who are also 3, resemble the minions quite a bit? They're like the human version of these minions and resemble them both in height and in demeanor. Maybe Gru is just a dad at heart and always wanted children, which is why he became the leader of the minions. We all know that stealing the moon was Gru's lifelong dream. After all, he planned this big theft since he was a child. But the big curiosity here is that when he finally achieves his goal and is floating in space, we see the ticket for the girls' ballet performance highlighted on the camera, and we can see the serial number printed on it. And when we arrange these numbers as a date, we have the date of July 20th, 1969. This is the exact date when the first human vehicle landed on the moon as part of the historic Apollo 11 mission. This reference is mind-blowing, isn't it? You might be too young, but Gru's second movie with his family has one of the coolest Easter eggs. It references one of the main works of pop culture, the 1975 movie Jaws, directed by the famous director Steven Spielberg. We see this detail when Gru and the Minions enter the cinema and there's a big poster of the movie Jaws behind them. Is this a clue about Gru's age, folks? Not to mention the punch that Gru gives the shark when he's going to save the girls. In one of the coolest scenes of the first movie, Gru is in a meeting with his minions and explains his grand plan to steal the moon. In the scene, we see a large TV and the MSNBC logo, a news channel that belongs to the same company that owns Illumination and Universal, which are the producer and distributor of Gru's and Minions movies. Back again to the battle of Gru and the Minions against the Vicious Six, a scene that caught our attention is when one of the villains from the sextet throws a van. But the detail is that this van is almost identical to another very famous vehicle from pop culture, the Mystery Machine, the van of the Scooby-Doo gang. Still talking about this scene, it closely resembles the scene of the van flying above the kids in Stranger Things, one of the most famous scenes from this Netflix series. This reference turned out really cool. And speaking of cool references, there's a very funny one that happens right at the beginning of the second Minions movie when one of Gru's yellow henchmen hits the Illumination sign during the opening credits with a wrecking ball. Just like what happens in the singer Miley Cyrus's music video, Wrecking Ball! Now is the moment for an honest question. Have you ever stopped to listen to what the Minions say and tried to identify their language? No matter how hard we try, we'll never distinguish more than a few words like banana. This happens because the producers revealed that, in fact, they don't speak a specific language, but rather a mixture of various languages spoken around the world all at once, which makes it practically impossible to understand what they're saying. Who would have thought Gru's henchmen were polyglots? If you're enjoying this amazing video, comment down below with #Gru and tell us which movie you like the most among all Despicable Me and Minions films. A huge reference that the films in this franchise make is when the Villain Con happens, an international villains conference that brings together various criminals and makes a very clear allusion to Comic-Con San Diego, which is a famous gathering of geek and pop culture fans. Even the logos of both events are similar, with an eye on the poster. Let's talk a bit about Dru now. In the dynamics between the brothers in the third film, you can notice that both strive to be each other's opposite, but at the same time they are quite similar. This strongly resembles a comic book story called Spy vs. Spy that emerged in the 1960s and became a cartoon on Cartoon Network, where two pointed-nosed spies are constantly chasing and playing pranks on each other. The interesting thing is that they are exactly the same, only one dresses in black and the other in white, just like Gru and Dru. Is it just a coincidence? I don't think so. Who here hasn't heard about the legend of King Arthur and the Excalibur sword? In the Minions movie, we see that Bob manages to pull out a sword stuck in a rock and becomes king, making a great reference to the famous legend of King Arthur, since they're in England itself, where the legend was created. Still talking about the Minions movie, there's an incredible reference that not everyone noticed. When the little yellow guys are in the sewer and come out from under a pedestrian crossing, some men pass over them on the crossing. If you don't know, this is an insane reference to the classic scene of the Beatles band members crossing a pedestrian crossing, which is just the most famous band of all time, no big deal. Now, in Minions 2, there's a scene that alludes to another well-known animation, Ice Age: Collision Course. When the Minions are transformed into animals by the Vicious Six, this scene is simply identical to the scene in Ice Age where Manny, Sid, and Diego experience the effects of magnetism and their fur stands up. In that same scene, while the Minions are learning martial arts, the outfits they wear are simply identical to the outfit worn by the character Beatrix Kiddo in the movie Kill Bill, which in turn is a reference to Bruce Lee's movie Game of Death. Come on, the only thing better than a reference is a reference within another reference. In Minions 2, when young Gru and Wild Knuckles go to the Bank of Evil, the receptionist shows a photo of his little son, who is none other than the villain from the first Despicable Me movie, Vector. In the photo, young Vector is holding a toy shark, which is quite interesting when we know that in the future, the villain will have a real pet shark. Each to their own taste, right? And for those who enjoy horoscopes and Oriental culture, you'll like this reference. When the Vicious Six villains and the Minions turn into animals, each of them becomes an animal from the Chinese zodiac. A dragon, a tiger, a snake, a monkey, and an ox on the villain side. And on the Minion side, a rabbit, a goat, and a rooster. This scene is really cool. And to wrap it up, a very well thought out reference by the creators. At the end of Minions 2, when Gru meets his idol Wild Knuckles and he reveals his big plan to one day steal the moon. And this is a perfect hook that refers to the story of the first Despicable Me movie, where Gru's main plan and objective are still to steal the moon. I thought this reference was brilliant, guys, and it closed the movie in an amazing way. These were the 25 details, curiosities, and Easter eggs that we gathered for you from all the Gru and Minions movies. If you're a fan of the franchise, like us, you must be counting down the days to watch Despicable Me 4. In the meantime, you can watch one of these two amazing videos that we've selected for you. Thanks, and see you soon.